Welcome to CapitolView, the weekly program on state government and politics and how it might just affect you. Joining me this week on CapitolView is Dave Dahl, legislative correspondent for WTAX Radio. Welcome, Dave.
You're homeless again, aren't you, Bruce?
Look at you. Yeah. Well, you know, I always live homeless, but I managed to carry all these records on my back with me wherever I go.
Well, that's good to be on. Thanks.
Also, Peter Hancock, writer with Capital News, Illinois. Welcome, Peter.
Good to see you, Bruce.
As has been the case for several weeks now, House Speaker Mike Madigan's fate is unknown as we approach the legislative session scheduled to begin next month. Most recently, House Speaker Madigan has told last weekend, apparently the Legislative Black Caucus in a meeting that presumably held virtually, hopefully held virtually, that he would support an income tax hike if Governor Pritzker jumped into that water first. Within less than a week, the Legislative Black Caucus has issued a statement in support of House Speaker Mike Madigan, who needs 60 votes to continue as Speaker, but doesn't quite have them yet. What are we to make of this? There's a lot, I think, maybe that's wrapped up in terms of obviously politics and policy here. Let's start with the income tax. The progressive income tax that Governor Pritzker proposed went down in flames last fall. It wasn't close. The electorate seems to have had no stomach for that. Now we have the House Speaker saying, "Yeah, Governor, you introduce a way to get more revenue by taxing people more, and I'll back you." Is this a serious thing that is coming from House Speaker Mike Madigan, or is this political? What do you think, Peter?
I think it's probably more political than anything else. Right now, the governor says he's focused on cutting spending, which he warns is going to be very painful, but he says he has no appetite for raising the existing flat tax. I think Madigan is basically saying if the governor proposes a tax increase, I'll carry the water for him, but there's no indication the governor's going to do that. Meanwhile, seems to be this weird contest going on where everybody is waiting for everybody else to be the first to come out and identify the spending cuts that they want to make. The Republicans held a news conference, I think, or maybe it was Leader Durkin put out a statement saying, the governor had ordered state agencies to make 5 or 6% cuts, wanted to see where that was going to happen. And the governor says, well, where are Jim Durkin's cuts? No one wants to be the first to come out and do that. And no one wants to be the first to come out and ask for a tax increase. So they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place right now. The governor has talked about closing some tax loopholes. That's kind of a broad term. One person's loophole is, another person's justifiable tax deduction. So we'll just have to see where that goes. But so far, there have been no specifics, and the 2021 session is coming up.
Where are we at? The gap's what, $3 billion-ish? Is that where we're at right now?
And about $3.5 billion. In a normal year, I think it might be a little bit worse this year because revenues have been so bad. The normal flow of revenues. But yeah, I think the governor says there is basically a structural deficit of about $3.5 billion, which means if you look at the amount of revenue that normally comes in and the expenses, which include required expenses for pension contributions, bond payments, things like that, they're short about $3.5 billion.
I think I agree with you, Peter. The governor may not be in a mood. No politician ever really is in a mood to raise taxes, but especially now. If he wants to get reelected in 2 years, the next 2 years of his term, I think, are going to be a lot more difficult than the first two. And that's not just because of the pandemic. It's because, as you say, there's a structural deficit here. And we've been hearing about structural deficits for many years before Pritzker became governor. And so now I think they're expecting him to fix this, as they expect all governors to fix things.
Well, I think, the governor really pinned a lot of his hopes for his first term on passage of that progressive tax cut. I mean, that was, according to his plan, that was the linchpin that made everything else fall into place. And they just didn't sell it that well. Obviously, the public wasn't convinced that it was necessary, didn't know where the money was going to be spent. It appears not to have been explained very well. And of course, then you've got that whole, mistrust of Springfield going on right now, which gets back to Michael Madigan and a lot of other people. So,
well, I guess in some way, yes, he pinned so much on this progressive tax idea that, again, wasn't even close. And in some way, shape, or form, and this had been talked about. I mean, the lieutenant governor, I believe, sometime last summer, warned that if we don't pass this, there'll be a tax hike coming. And she was
20%.
Go ahead.
20% is what she said.
20%. And she was somewhat tamped down. Let's not talk about this now. The treasurer, Michael Frericks, at one point said, if we do this, this could potentially open the door to tax and retirement income. Shut up, Mr. Treasurer. Don't do this. Tamp it down. Dave, does...
in a world where everything's on the table, it sure looks like there's stuff that's not on the table.
Yeah.
Their retirement tax, I mean, that's a third rail. No one wants to do anything. And it reminds me of when they talked about an array of service sales taxes, the old dry cleaning, haircuts, attorneys.
Like every other state does, but go ahead, Dave.
They lobbied out almost everything but like tattoos or something. And they got it down to something like $50 million, which, why bother? So they wound up not doing it. And so if you can't talk about anything, how can anything remain on the table? And so that's where the governor is right to say we ought to do cuts. What's left to cut? I mean, identify that $3 billion.
Identify those cuts, because state government over many years has gotten smaller and smaller, largely unnoticed because of a lack of revenue. And I think the Illinois Department of Employment Security might be one example of that. The governor's is now getting a lot of criticism, and rightfully so, about the Illinois Department of Employment Security failure to deliver benefits to folks who deserve them, the failure even to answer the telephone or to respond to any communication. And the truth of the matter is, apparently, according to a report by the Better Government Association issued not that long ago, they just didn't have the troops. There weren't enough folks there to really tackle this problem. We also have... Go ahead.
Yeah. Does anybody have the resources to go from, zero to pandemic? They were overwhelmed, and you got to think that other states were too, but certainly Illinois has been slow to correct the problems that have come up, without warning.
Yeah, but doesn't the governor bear some responsibility for this? Putting all your chips, so to speak, on a constitutional amendment, pandemic or no pandemic. This was never a shoo-in. Isn't that somewhat like a gambler in a casino putting all of his money on one hand of blackjacks? His or her money on one hand of blackjack.
Yeah, that'd be one way to look at it. I got to think that Pritzker's team was not prepared for the saturation effort that the anti-forces put together. And if you look at it like Lieutenant Governor Stratton's right, where the alternative is a 20% tax on everybody, the people who voted no, the lower 97% of them that didn't believe the governor, that voted no on the tax question, you could say have voted for a tax increase on themselves. Here I am protecting the top 3% from higher taxes, if you're to believe, what the governor and the other proponents say. But I agree with you two. It wasn't well explained. They let the anti-forces get way out in front of them, and they had an easy message to say in one breath.
And here comes Madigan now saying, hey, you support a tax hike and I'll follow you. And he probably knows darn well that the governor is not in any kind of a political position right now to propose an income tax hike.
Well, time will tell. I mean, we'll see where those cuts are and see if there's, $3, $4, $5 billion. And I'm thinking they can't get that high with cuts alone.
Go ahead, Peter.
Despite what some people think or say, it's really not that bloated a government, especially when you consider per capita state employees and when you consider the pension obligations. I mean, that's what so much goes for. And they've tried. I mean, Governor Quinn tried. They can't get it through the Supreme Court. What they have been able to do is put in the lesser tier for new hires. But, that's what a lot of people talk about, the big pensions. You retire at, 50 or 55. Well, you live, 20, 30, 40 years beyond that, still raking in the pension. And they haven't found a way to cut that or to do anything to account for it. You'd have to change the Constitution. Well, maybe that's what's next.
Go ahead, Peter. You were going to say something?
Oh, I was earlier. I was going to say that I remember interviewing the governor on the first anniversary of him taking office. This was back in January before the pandemic hit. And the first question I asked him was, what have you learned over the course of the past year? What do you know now about the office of governor that you didn't know before? And his answer was that he did not realize the extent to which state government agencies had been hollowed out, and the extent to which morale within the people left in those agencies had just been decimated. And that included the Department of Economic Security, or Employment, IDES.
The Unemployment Agency, go ahead.
Yeah, and then the pandemic hit, and those people got hit with a volume of jobless benefits claims, the likes of which nobody had ever seen. And I just looked at the numbers Thursday morning, and they're ticking back up again. There were like another 100,000, more than 100,000 people filing initial claims. They have just been decimated in that office. So I do think it's a little hard to completely blame the Pritzker administration for not being prepared for that. Nobody could have been prepared for that. And especially not an agency that had been hollowed out by the previous administration.
But he's got 2 years to election day to fix it. And that is, some of this stuff, absolutely, he's inherited. There's no question about this. He inherited a government that, as you point out, was hollowed out. He inherited a dysfunctional tax system. He failed to fix the dysfunctional tax system. Now he's got to figure out how to fix a hollowed out government without the revenue that would be brought in if he had a better tax system. At some point, folks are going to start saying, if they already are not, it's, this first legislative session you had, that was a humdinger of a legislative session, but where's the beef now?
Well, and also, outside of pension obligations and bond payments, the big expenses within state government are Medicaid and K through 12 education and higher education. You cut education spending, you're basically just forcing property tax increases at the local level or big cuts in the quality of education that students are getting. And that's something, that starts hitting real close to home to every family in Illinois. And so the choices going forward are really just, there aren't any pretty choices.
If you're Republicans, you got to be loving this on some level. They did way better last November, I think, than they've done in a while. The Supreme Court race, the flat tax, they gained a seat in the House despite being outspent. There are signs that the Democratic Party might be vulnerable, perhaps. And again, we're early on; we're 2 years away. But there are some shoals out here, I think, for this governor to negotiate that perhaps are unprecedented. Well, at least that no governor's had to face in a long time. And is he up to the task?
Yeah, the Republicans had a net gain of 1 seat in the House and a net loss of 1 seat in the Senate. And I keep thinking, of how much money was spent, if you gathered up all the money that was spent in state legislative races, for a net change, it was basically a wash. But you're right. The Republicans did score a big win by defeating the progressive income tax. They scored a big win by not retaining a Supreme Court judge. But we're going to have to wait and see who wins the election. It's not guaranteed that Republicans are going to pick up that seat. But then, you also had, I think most people would say that Donald Trump performed better than he was expected to. Mark Curran, who ran against Senator Dick Durbin, certainly he did better than I thought he would. I mean, that was a much closer race than I thought it was going to be.
Sure.
So Republicans did well. And in particular, they did well in House races in the Chicago suburbs and areas that they had lost in 2018. So they rebounded. At least they stopped the bleeding that had occurred before. They made a little bit of a rebound, and I think they're probably poised to do a little bit better in 2022.
Going forward, again, this legislative session is looking to be, it probably one
assuming we have one.
Yeah, assuming we have one in one form or another. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that got backed up because we didn't have a real one this past year. And so you've got that pressure from just the normal stuff that needs to be done by any lawmaking body anywhere in the United States to keep government going. A lot of that stuff didn't get done. And there's all kinds of stuff in any given legislative session. We didn't have that. So we're going to have holdovers from that. We've got a financial crisis going on in the state. Perhaps might be some, excuse you, Peter, that might somehow be unlike anything we've seen before. We've got the political part of it. We've got Michael Madigan, who is no question, one of the brightest political minds, I think, in the entire United States, hanging on, and he'll do anything to hold on to his power. And you've got all kinds of issues that really hadn't been there. One, for example, being guns. The head of Illinois State Police this week has acknowledged that a firearm owner's identification system is broken. It's irretrievably broken. They're having delays as long as 145, 122 days in issuing FOID cards and concealed weapons permits. They've thrown folks into overtime. They've thrown money at this to try to get it down since the tragedy in Aurora a few years ago, a few years ago, where a gunman went into a workplace. He shouldn't have had a gun and killed a lot of people. And ask any politician how much they like, Democratic politicians particularly, how much they like to deal with gun legislation. Let's talk about that for a second, the guns. The head of Illinois State Police last year said we need to fingerprint folks to get FOID cards. That went nowhere, in part because I think of a truncated legislative session, also because of fingerprinting sounds weird. Now he's asking for a much more substantial overhaul, and lives are at stake here, as Aurora showed. Is it going to be able to, will that get done? How do you do that with everything else that's going on?
Well, there's another side of the gun debate, and that is that this huge backlog is occurring right in the middle of hunting season. I've spoken to gun store owners and the head of the Illinois State Rifle Association, and they're talking about, people wanted to get deer permits. I think we're in waterfowl season now or somewhere very close to it. They can't go get ammunition if you don't have a valid FOID card. And while the state may be saying, no, your card is good if you turned in your application on time and you haven't heard a response, your card is renewed. Well, but the gun store owners can't go by that. They need to see a card.
Understandable.
So, yeah, you start messing around with hunting season in certain parts of Illinois, then, you're starting to mess with people's way of life.
Yeah. I guess, not to pile on the governor, but there's going to be folks that say, wait, you were on notice for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
This predates, let's be fair, the problems and backlogs with FOID cards predate Pritzker, but he hadn't fixed it. And because of the war, he hasn't fixed it. And
the Rauner administration emptied out the account where those fees go that are supposed to, you pay a fee to get that
Right.
card, and the fee is supposed to cover the cost of running the program that issues the cards.
Right.
And that fee fund got swept during the Rauner administration. So,
But guess what? Rauner's not governor anymore. Pritzker is.
yeah.
Go ahead, Dave.
I think the honeymoon's over, and the time for blaming Rauner is long past. And the governor didn't create all these problems, but he's the governor now, and he's got to fix them. He's got to solve them, and he needs the legislature's help to do that. And if I'm a legislator, maybe I'll say, just like Madigan did with the taxes, go ahead, governor, and lead. Try it out and report back.
Dave, is that a T-shirt you plan on selling anytime soon?
I could do that.
Okay, well, make sure you get down to the copyright office as soon as we can.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
With this taping, but in all seriousness, yes, the honeymoon, I think, is over if it hadn't already ended. And right now we have a governor that wrote a lot of checks he can't cash. He's got administrative issues. His marijuana proposal, we're running out of time here, but legal marijuana has not turned out like he promised. IDES, which we've discussed. He's got a bunch of folks that have died at the LaSalle Veterans Home. And we haven't talked about that, but that makes things real. Will this become will LaSalle Veterans Home become Pritzker's Quincy's?
Quincy.
Yeah, that's what folks are thinking. Go ahead.
No, I think you're right. And I think it's interesting that we had the hue and cry over the previous governor and the previous administration over Legionnaire's disease in Quincy. And this COVID situation is, it's just awful at these long-term care homes, particularly LaSalle.
LaSalle, what we've a quarter or more of the residents of that veterans have died there?
Yeah, I think they're up to 32, and I can't imagine they have more than 100 people living there, or much more.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say it's as bad as it gets. I hope it's not as bad as it gets. I hope it gets better. But that's, this has occurred despite a governor who has been on the front lines, as other governors throughout the United States have been, notably Andrew Cuomo in New York, but always kind of seen as, hey, I'm the first person to protect you, keep you safe in public health. I'm the one that's battling down the federal government's foibles, and now this happens.
Yeah, I mean, getting on Bruce Rauner about Quincy, I mean, that's a layup for anyone running against him. And now, arguably, this situation is hardly any better. No one's blaming Tammy Duckworth for this one yet, though.
Not yet. Who someone at some point might blame your dog or mine. This is the way that Illinois politics work. The governor, when he came into office, hired folks and he gave them bumps. He says, this is, I'm paying extra because I want the best folks available.
Yeah, out of his pocket, doubling their salary.
Doubling their salaries
There's
out
top
of
20 people. I'd hate to be number 21 on that list. Sure.
Yeah. Rauner did something similar. The best team in America, or whatever it was that he once claimed to have. 2 years in, are we getting our money's worth out of these folks that are in charge of the administration of government? Politics is one thing, but making the trains run on time, getting the FOID cards out on time, keeping folks alive in veterans homes, that's an important key function of government. And he's fallen down in a few places. Can he now? He did fire. There have been folks replaced at the LaSalle Veterans Home. Is it going to go higher? Should it go higher?
I think it's got to be about the governor. I'm not sure there's enough evidence yet to pin it on, for example, Director Chapelevia, the director of Veterans Affairs. Perhaps there is, but the governor's got to grab hold of these issues, including that one, and including the economic problems. And what are you going to cut? What revenue you're going to bring in? And, once again, I think we all said it. They can't accomplish this by cuts alone.
Yeah.
Can they?
No, they cannot. And that is kind of the misnomer, I think, oftentimes in government anywhere, and particularly in Illinois. There is, you can't cut much deeper. You can't cut the Medicaid. You can't, there are key things we have to do. We have less than 1 minute left. Peter Hancock, if you are the chief advisor to the governor right now, what do you tell him?
Oh gosh, there's a reason why I'm not the chief advisor to the governor. But I would just say, keep your eyes focused. Keep your head in the game. He's, right now just overwhelmed with the pandemic. But there's a lot of other stuff that goes on in state government that's not pandemic related, and that stuff has to get taken care of too.
Okay. And with that, we're about out of time. And so thank you, everybody, for joining us here on Capitol View. And we hope to see you again next week. Goodbye.